Good morning, everyone. The webinar will start in 7 minutes. Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. The webinar will start in approximately 4 minutes. Thanks. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mental Health Commission of Canada's webinar series on integrating psychological health and safety in the workplace. Today's topic is Don't Isolate Those Working in Isolation. My name is Tina Corey, and I'm a program manager on the workplace team with the Mental Health Commission of Canada, and I have the pleasure of introducing today's webinar and speakers. Just before we get started, I just wanted to go through a few housekeeping items. I invite you to send any questions or comments using the chat feature, which can be found on the right-hand side of your screen. If you don't see the chat feature, look for a little icon in the upper right-hand corner. It looks like a bubble. Click on it, and a chat window should appear for you on the right-hand side of the PowerPoint slides. We encourage you, when you're sending your questions, please use the drop-down menu and select all panelists, and the questions will go to myself as well as the presenter, and we will ask the questions on your behalf. If you'd like to send something anonymously, you can also send it directly to the host. This webinar is also being recorded, and it will be posted on the MHCC website in the webinar archive section following the presentation in about 2 weeks. Also, due to the large number of participants today, we have muted all your phone lines just to eliminate background noise. It's my pleasure to introduce you today to our speakers for the webinar. Our host will be Nitika Ruwari, Manager, Workplace Research, Evaluation, and Knowledge Translation with the Mental Health Commission of Canada. Also joining us is Kim McLaren, a Project Manager with Trucking Human Resource Canada. Trucking HR Canada recognizes the importance of holistic health and wellness programs that address both physical and mental health needs, and Kim is here with us today to speak to us about Trucking HR's initiatives that they're working on to address mental health and wellness challenges faced by many of their members in the trucking industry, particularly long-haul drivers who work in isolation for extended periods of time. I'd like to welcome our speakers today and thank you all for joining us. I'm going to turn things over to you, Nitika, to get things started.
Thank you, Tina. Welcome, everyone. Very, very excited that you could join us and speak to us in collaboration on a very important topic, which we think should be addressed and should be discussed, is around working in isolation and workers who do work alone, and what about their mental health. So over the past few years, you've heard us talk about various topics around mental health and how to promote and protect mental health of employees. Today is the topic around working in isolation. We hope we can engage you in a conversation and also get some feedback from you throughout the webinar today. Our focus today is of course going to be setting the stage on importance of mental health in the workplace, and then really diving into what is working alone. What does it mean to work alone or in isolation? With an example, as Tina mentioned, coming from Trucking HR Canada and what they have seen with respect to drivers and especially long-haul drivers and about their mental health and how are some employers able to address that in their own workplaces. Then we'll take some questions at the end, so feel free, as Tina mentioned, to ask us your questions throughout the webinar, and we'll be happy to take them on towards the end. With that, I'd like to first start off by setting the stage, as we said, importance of mental health in the workplace. What is mental health? Mental health is the capacity for each and all of us to feel, think, and act in ways that enhances our ability to enjoy life and deal with the challenges we face. It is a positive sense of emotional and spiritual well-being that respects the importance of culture, equity, social justice, as well as interconnections and personal dignity. I want to highlight for you that mental health problems and illnesses do affect us all, either directly or through our families, friends, or coworkers. In fact, we do know that mental health can be affected by everyday life stressors, and including those that are affected in the workplace. With adults spending more waking hours in the workplace than anywhere else, approximately 60% of our waking hours are in the workplace, we do know that workplaces can play an essential role in maintaining as well as promoting positive mental health of employers. Mental health promotion and mental health illness prevention are broad-based mental health initiatives in which workplaces do play a key role. In fact, if they do, we can avoid over 500,000 Canadians missing work each week due to mental health problems or illnesses. The harm or health created in workplaces can migrate as well into families, communities, and society as a whole. And it should, in our opinion, be considered the same way we do consider physical health and safety in the workplace. I'm sure you've all seen a number like this being presented to you at some point or another, but just want to highlight that mental health problems and illnesses are the #1 cause of disability in Canada and account for nearly 30% of disability claims and 70% of disability costs. Mental health claims are the fastest growing category of disability claims in Canada. We also know that $50 billion a year is what it costs the economy, which equals to about 2.8% of Canada's 2011 GDP. Over the next 30 years, the total cost to the economy is projected to be more than $2.5 trillion. We also know that mental health in the workplaces does have a cost related to things like absenteeism, presenteeism, and turnover. And in fact, it does cost Canadian businesses around $198 billion. It will, if not addressed in the next 30 years. The longer someone is away from work due to illness, in fact, we know that there's less chance for them to successfully return to work as well. We know that if someone's off from work for 6 months, their chances are reduced by 50%. But if someone's off from work for 9 months or more, their chances are reduced by 90%. And we also know that 10 to 25% of mental health disability costs currently directly borne by employers could be avoided if workplace mental health is promoted as well as cherished, just as much as physical health and safety. This is an example of a study that was done back in 2010, which essentially tells you that compared to other illnesses that are reported and claims that are made in the workplaces and any other episode, respiratory being one of the highly claimed illnesses in the workplaces, the overall impact of mental illness when it comes to the number of days someone stays away, and also the cost per episode that it can have are astronomically larger than any of the main claims that are being made in the workplaces today. So why is that? Why do we have so much concern around mental health? In fact, we talked about what is mental health, but we also know that good mental health is not the absence of mental illness. It's not just the absence of mental illness. We know that 2/3 of people with mental illness won't seek help and are stigmatized in some way or fashion. In fact, stigma is one of the major reasons why people are afraid of seeking help. Stigma is the result of negative and prejudicial attitudes and behaviors that are expressed by people to those living with mental health problems and illnesses, and it is in fact destructive and leaves a mark of shame that makes people feel different and socially excluded. It is important to mention here the social exclusion part, because not only is the area and the concept of mental health and mental illness very stigmatizing, but this can be even more exaggerated for workers who work in isolation. One of the things we are trying to do at the Commission and through our various departments and works is encouraging people to seek help and feel comfortable to do that. This can only happen in an environment that is supportive And when it comes to workplaces, and we speak more and more around why this is relevant, the concept of even stigma is relevant in the workplace, we know that if we reduce stigma, individuals seek help sooner, which leads to higher likelihood of success, better prognosis, and shorter recovery time for your employees. It leads to a culture shift in thinking and attitudes overall among individuals, resulting in more acceptance of mental health. It also increases productivity of employees within the workplace, leading to a positive financial impact and reduced absenteeism and increased presenteeism in the workplace. So we have a question for you today. As the listeners, we want you to think about what are some of those labels you've heard being used for individuals with mental illness, and we want you to share that with us using the chat function on the right of your screen. We'll give it a few seconds to see what individuals have to say, but think about any of the labels that you've heard being used. Thank you so much. I'm already seeing so many responses come through, and it really does speak to the kind of atmosphere it creates for an individual who's already struggling and is having to hear words such as weird, crazy, irresponsible, difficult, loony, lazy again. We have disengaged, suck it up, special child, challenged, and non-reliable. These are words that individuals, when you consider in a society where 1 in 5 Canadians are going to be struggling mental illness in their lifetime, these are individuals, and another one just came in called freak. These are individuals you know, I know, or sometimes they are ourselves. We hear these words, and we hear the emotion of you just have to suck it up, you just have to do what you need to do to get your work done and to be productive in your social life, in your personal life, and in your work life. But this is something someone is struggling with, and it is real. It is definitely something that an individual is experiencing just as much a physical illness. Mental illness is very, very real. So I want to thank all of you for sharing your thoughts today, and hopefully we can engage you more throughout the webinar today as well. So what does that all mean when we talk about the concept of working alone? I mentioned to you that social exclusion is something that an individual experiencing mental illness can definitely feel. But think about that, and think about an individual who is working alone or in isolation. Social inclusion can add astronomically to their experience. We know that Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety defines a person working alone when they are on their own, when they cannot be seen or heard by another person. So let's talk to you again. We would like to start a poll to ask you the question, do you or anyone you know works in isolation or works alone? And we hope to keep this poll on for about a minute to allow everyone to answer. So with that, I'll just start on the poll. We have about 15 or so seconds remaining, so for those who haven't answered, we encourage you to answer, but already seeing a lot of responses come through, so thank you very much. Well, thank you so much. And it looks like so many people answered, and we have about 56% of the participants saying they either themselves work alone or know someone who works alone or in isolation. This really does help us to engage you in a conversation today, and we know that this will be a conversation that's close to your heart and something that might be relevant for you. So thank you again for sharing that with us, and it really does go to show that there are many industries and sectors, as we'll highlight in a couple of slides, that do have workers who work alone or in isolation. And also to state that employers do have a duty to care. While an employer can require you to work alone, they still have a duty to take reasonable precautions to provide a safe and healthy workplaces. And laws around that can be found in both provincial as well as federal documents. But must say here that there are several provinces that are taking the lead to make specific arrangements for individuals who work alone in their legislation, including provinces such as British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. So what are some of those industry examples where employees work alone or in isolation? Transportation, construction, we have academia. These are some of the examples you see on your screen that might not come across also as an obvious example. But I want to say to you that workers who do work alone or in isolation away from their routine contact with other people do tend to be at a risk for things such as violent attacks from intruders. These could include individuals who are custodians, trade workers, security guards, parking lot attendants. What about those who work hazardous work, who perform hazardous work? Workers who do perform that type of work without routine interaction with other employees and the public may be unable to get immediate help if they become ill or injured. These include folks such as in the construction work, hydro workers, forestry workers, factory workers. What about those who, say, handle cash or other valuables? They are at a risk of robbery and, in fact, getting traumatized by those experiencing, hence that connection to mental health. Those could be gas station attendants, workers in the liquor store, and so on and so forth. So we do know that research has shown that workers with little control over their work and or little control and support from their social environment and coworkers and supervisors and managers are at a greater risk of experiencing stress, burnout, depression, as well as anxiety. We do know that when problems arise, a lack of contact and social support from coworkers can lead to a sense of helplessness, anxiety, frustration, as well as isolation in people's minds. It can be highly demanding for an individual who's working alone, as you are the only person performing a task, and it can also be frightening for some individuals who work alone, say, late at night. I would like to thank you for your time today and really helping me understand where you are at when it comes to knowing workers or yourself working alone. But now I would like to graciously hand over the microphone to Kim, who will walk us through real-life examples on how it is and what are the realities in the trucking industry, especially as it relates to drivers. Kim?
Thank you, Nitika. And I just want to start off by thanking you for giving us that nice overview about what the importance of mental health within our workplaces is. And I know you mentioned that one of those most at-risk populations up there with construction and mining is the transportation sector. And this is the sector that I'm coming from today. And we'll be talking about mental health in the trucking industry and what we can do to enhance particularly the mental health, but also the physical health, because they work hand in hand, of drivers within our sector. So if you could go to the next slide, please. We'll start off by giving a little bit of an overview about the Canadian trucking industry. And really, trucking is fundamental to the functioning of our economy. If you think about virtually every product that we purchase or consume as Canadians, at some point it's been carried on a truck, and there's been a driver behind the wheel of that truck. So approximately 2/3 by value of our trade in Canada within the United States moves by truck. And so there are well over 400,000 individuals that are employed by our sector, and approximately 300,000 of those are what we refer to as commercial vehicle operators or drivers. And many of those are long-haul drivers, which are working in isolation for extended periods of time, which can range from days to even weeks. Next slide, please. We know that the trucking industry is very important to the Canadian economy, and so Trucking HR Canada, the organization that I am representing today, we're a national not-for-profit partnership-based organization. And we bring together a number of stakeholders from government, employers and carriers and fleets, workers, which include drivers, dispatchers, and so on, training providers, provincial and territorial trucking associations. We bring all of these stakeholders together with a mandate to really promote safe, secure, efficient, and professional driving. And really part of that is ensuring that our truck drivers are of the best physical and mental health that they can be. So we serve as a neutral forum for gathering and exchanging ideas, for doing research, for providing knowledge and information, and really highlighting some best practices for HR and training within our sector. Next slide, please. So it was mentioned in the bio for me initially that Trucking HR Canada has a number of initiatives to recognize this holistic health and wellness to enhance the physical and mental health needs of our drivers. And to support the holistic health of our drivers, we've developed and delivered some HR seminars and webinars to address the unique mental health challenges that are faced by our industry. We also run what's called the Top Fleet Employer Program, and this is a national program that recognizes the importance of having sound HR policies and procedures in place. And this includes health and wellness programs and resources within the trucking industry. And this recognizes fleets that offer the best workplaces in Canada's trucking industry, and that's reflected by the broad range of human resource policies and programs that they have in place. So the Top Fleet Employer Program isn't a competition, but it rather recognizes fleets that are meeting HR standards of excellence. And we're just in the process right now of reviewing the applications for our 2016 Top Fleet Employer Program. Next slide, please. So we'll talk a little bit about mental health in trucking. And our truck drivers are widely considered to be a vulnerable population that have very unacceptable high risk of injury, disease, and mortality in comparison to other workers. And this could be similar across various industries where we have workers that are working in isolation, working long hours, and are often away from home. Drivers in particular have higher rates of obesity, of diabetes, of anxiety and depression, of heart disease, drug addiction than the average worker. So mental health issues often play off physical issues and vice versa. So our drivers are not only at risk for physical health issues, but also mental health issues, which can really compound to create a not so pleasant scenario for these drivers that are on the road. Next slide, please. So there are some occupational stressors that are very much rooted in the transportation environment that our drivers face numerous times a day when they're completing their hauls. They're under constant time pressure to get their cargo from point A to point B. And our drivers suffer from social isolation. The majority of drivers don't have a partner in the cab with them. And so this isolation, you have a lot of time to yourself. This can lead to boredom and loneliness on the road. And you have a lot of time to think about your family, to think about financial pressures. And something that we don't think about is drivers are often not treated with a high degree of respect, either by other industry workers or by public at large. There are some stigmas associated with the driver occupation that can lead to a negative perception of the occupation, which can then affect the driver's self-esteem. And every day, drivers, even when we're driving our own cars, we're faced with various driving hazards. So imagine if you were a driver as your professional career. You are facing numerous hazards from weather to other motorists, suffering from your own rage or experiencing road rage of others. They can run into unexpected traffic, gridlock, construction, accidents, and to compound this stress, many drivers also experience a fear of violence. Nitika mentioned this as well. If they're working alone, if they're stopping at remote warehouse drop-offs at night, if they're at unsafe truck stops, if they're at roadside rest breaks, it is very, the driver is at risk of violent behavior, particularly if they have very valuable cargo in that trailer. We hear stories of drivers held at gunpoint. So it can be very stressful to think about that violence that could happen. So if you're thinking about all of these occupational stressors that these drivers are experiencing, that can also lead to fatigue and loss of sleep, which makes dealing with all of these stressors even harder. Next slide, please. So it goes without saying that the higher number of occupational stressors that an individual faces, in my case a driver, the higher the risk for psychological and psychiatric problems like depression, insomnia, or suicidal thoughts, substance abuse, including drugs and alcohol, and even risky sexual behaviors and suicide. And occupational stress is the highest for long-haul drivers who are on the road for extended periods of time. Some long-haul drivers can be on the road for up to 4 weeks at a time. So if you think about that, that's a long time to be on your own and away from your family, friends, and home. Next slide, please. One of the concerns that we have in terms of mental health for truck drivers is post-traumatic stress disorder. So being involved in a highway accident can leave a lasting mental scar for the driver. And being in a wreck or even being the first person upon the scene, that often happens when drivers are driving at night, it can cause enough stress and anxiety to become a diagnosable mental illness like acute stress disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. So drivers that are dealing with a severe mental health crisis like PTSD, they have to try and manage their symptoms in isolation while they're regularly confronted by some of their trauma triggers. And this is all while they're battling fatigue. And so some of the symptoms that our drivers with PTSD experience include difficulty sleeping, and on the flip side, also difficulty staying awake and concentrating, and also panic attacks. So that's a lot for our drivers to deal with. Next slide, please. And the industry itself can impact mental health. The trucking industry and the driving profession in particular is very, very male-dominated. In Canada, approximately 97% of our drivers are male. And something that we know about men is that they are typically less likely than women to seek treatment for emotional distress. And then to further complicate the issue, demands of the job, like being on the road and not having complete control over their schedules, makes accessing healthcare services very difficult. And there are also various industry regulations that really put a lot of emphasis on the importance of being physically and mentally fit for the job of driver. And so to comply with these regulations, drivers may unfortunately downplay or ignore some of these mental and physical health issues that they experience, and that only adds to the problem. Next slide, please. So there have been some studies done to look a bit more closely about mental health with truck drivers. And a recent study found that truck drivers are a highly underserved population with regards to mental health. So in one particular study, a random sample of 316 male truckers that were aged between 23 and 76 were surveyed at a large truck stop in North Carolina in the U.S. And these surveyed drivers were found to have significant issues that were affecting their mental health. This was all a self-reporting survey. About 28% of those drivers, again a sample of 316, said they experienced loneliness. 27% said they suffered from depression. About 21% had chronic sleep disturbances. 15% suffered from anxiety, and 13% had other emotional problems. So you can see that there is definitely something going on here. There's something amiss in terms of mental health. And these types of studies help our industry to look at what would be valuable interventions to improve the emotional and occupational health of our drivers. So it's important for us to understand this before we can move forward. Next slide, that's fine, thank you. So there are a number of blogs that are out there that talk about isolation and a truck driver. And many of us fail to think about what it would really be like to be a driver alone in a cab for extended periods of time. And this quote is from Trucker Mike. He is a blogger who blogs on truckingtruth.com. And he shed some light on the effects of isolation. And Trucker Mike said it isn't simply being alone that is hard. It's missing those back at home. Sitting alone in the cab of a truck gives you a lot of time to think and reflect. And oftentimes when you're there sitting with your own thoughts, they're not always positive thoughts that we ruminate on. So there can be that opportunity for some of those negative thoughts, some depressive thoughts to sneak in. Next slide, please. And Brett Aquila is the founder of truckingtruth.com, and we'll provide you with this resource as well. And he routinely writes articles about what it's like to be a driver. And in one particular article that really resonated with me, entitled "Solitude Becomes Every Truck Driver's Heaven or Hell," Brett really says that one of the most common reasons why people walk away from trucking is the relentless solitude, the isolation from their home, their family, and their friends. And if that isn't bad enough, the most heartbreaking part may be that it doesn't necessarily end when you get home. And this quote really brings light to the constant sense of isolation that is felt by drivers who are really torn between their lives on the road and their lives at home, and oftentimes they don't feel like a total part of either one of these lives. So Brett goes on to say that early in his career, he realized that his return wasn't going to be the homecoming parade that he expected. So he says, as a long-haul truck driver, you become an outsider in the world you once knew. Your family and friends are busy doing everyday things that don't involve you anymore. Your kids have baseball games, play rehearsals, and high school dances you won't be there to see. Your spouse has chores to finish, children to look after, and bills to pay that you won't be there to help out with. And your old friends now have new jobs, new hobbies, and new friends that you won't be there to share. After returning home, you realize that the parade going on isn't in honor of your arrival. It's your former life continuing on without you. So that really shows that parking that tractor at the end of your haul doesn't mean the end of isolation for the driver. Next slide, please. So you can see that this isolation really follows the driver around. And so these high stress levels and mental health issues can lead to unfortunate self-medicating behaviors. And some of these common self-medicating behaviors include drug use, alcohol use, and sex work patronage for companionship. So those are some of the issues that we have to look at as well as being risk factors for our drivers. Next slide. So we know what the issues are, but the important part is that we recognize those issues and we move forward. And one of the ways that our drivers themselves are combating this issue is to become more connected virtually. Many drivers have tablets and Wi-Fi on the road, and there are a number of trucking websites and blogs that can be helpful to provide resources and support for both physical and mental health. So just a few examples of these websites. We have The Healthy Trucker, and it provides some tips for life on the road and the truck driving lifestyle. We also have the driver health news category of the truckingnetwork.ca, and it provides articles to support the physical health and wellness of drivers. Next slide. I showed you two of the quotes that I provided today were from the trucking blogs on truckingtruth.com. And truckingtruth.com, their motto is that it provides a positive yet honest view of the trucking industry with friendly advice from experienced drivers. And these driver blogs, often the bloggers also have Facebook pages, Twitter feeds that really give some real-life examples of what it is like being on the road, and it forms a virtual community. And smarttrucking.com also provides drivers with a range of resources like tips to maintain mental health while on the road. So just doing a quick Google search, you'll notice that there are websites and blogs that are popping up that are geared towards drivers, particularly long-haul drivers. There's also special segments for women drivers as well, to really get at the physical and mental balance that drivers need to remain healthy on the road. Next slide, please. Social media is also a very important way for drivers to connect with their peers in the industry, but also with their friends and family back home. There's various applications like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram that allow drivers to feel connected while on the road. And there are a number of apps where a number of these organizations have free apps, Twitter feeds that can be accessed by drivers. And like I mentioned, because there is more Wi-Fi and there's more technology, cell phones on the road, drivers are able to feel more connected every day. Next slide, please. So when isolation is a reality within an occupation, we really need to think about, and we have as an industry been thinking about, what more can be done to protect the mental health and well-being of our drivers. So research from actual drivers suggests that staying connected virtually can greatly help drivers to feel less socially isolated. And that can be if you can connect every day with family or friends so that you feel like you're still in the loop as to what's going on back home. And we have FaceTime, we have Skype, and various other applications that can be used. Drivers also recommend making the cab of a truck a home away from home. So that can be bringing personal items, making it comfortable, having linens or bed sheets from home. Also, if the regulations permit, and that could depend on the carrier for which the driver is operating, you can also have a pet with you, and sometimes partners or family members can do ride-alongs as well. And earlier in the webinar, I referenced the connection between physical and mental health and how one issue can play off another. So maintaining physical activity, even if that's getting out and doing some stretches during a fuel stop, that can really help to increase endorphins and improve mental and physical health. Next slide, please. Trucking HR Canada has also made strides to help with our industry. In June 2015, we formed a partnership with the Canadian Trucking Alliance. There was a call to raise awareness around mental health within the industry. And so what we did was we developed and delivered a webinar, particularly around the new CSA standards for psychological health and safety in the workplace. And so we developed these seminars to really give some practical advice about how to implement that voluntary standard. Next slide, please. In our webinar, we do provide some detailed instructions on how to use the Guarding Minds at Work platform. And this is a resource that was developed by the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety to practically implement the voluntary CSA standard that was commissioned by the Mental Health Commission of Canada. And so Trucking HR Canada is very pleased to be able to provide that webinar to our stakeholder groups within the industry, particularly carriers and fleets that are interested in supporting not only the physical health, but also moving into the mental health of their drivers and all of their employees. Next slide. So within our Top Fleet Employer Program, we're recognizing fleets that support the health and wellness of their employees through sound HR practices. And a number of our top fleet employers have indicated that they hold information sessions on mental health and more specifically on PTSD for new hires during orientation. There have been some videos and other interactive multimedia resources that have been developed to really illustrate the mental side of trucking. And all of our 2015 top fleet employers have employee and family assistance programs in place. However, as an industry, we recognize that work still needs to be done as the uptake of our employee and family assistance programs within the industry, within these employers, is only at about 18%. And we have also expanded our Top Fleet Employer program to provide formal recognition for mental health resources and support for workers that are really starting to recognize the importance of mental health and wellness within the trucking industry. So we're trying to focus on that balance between the physical and the mental health as being important. And I wanted to end off by thanking all of you for participating today. Looking forward to any questions that may come forward. But we're very interested as an industry organization to get some feedback in terms of what needs to be done. We know that we don't have everything in place to support the mental health of our drivers, but we want to open the doors to see how we can better support our drivers and employers in this area. So thank you very much to all of you and to the Mental Health Commission for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Kim, for all that insight into the drivers and what their mental health state is, as well as some of the practical ways employers can promote the mental health of these drivers, and which I believe resonates very well with a lot of industries and sectors, even outside of the transportation industry. One of the examples I'll give you is I saw a chat come through while you were speaking to say this really resonates with the sentiments of the consulting workforce that are always on the road and working alone, and in fact working long hours. So it doesn't matter if there's an individual behind the wheels or if there's a worker who's always flying and going from city to city and going to client, these realities do address a lot of the industries as well. And as well, I want to highlight for you that there was another sort of comment that came in appreciation of the various network and community sites for the virtual workforce as well. So once again, really thank you for your time today and for presenting on behalf of Trucking HR Canada. So now back to all of you. What can you do after you've heard all of this information and all of the tools and tips that have been shared with you? We hope that what you would take away as your practical next steps from this discussion is perhaps a way to speak to and engage your employees. As employers, there is a shared responsibility that can be leveraged between employers and employees to really identify for that employee, how can an employer protect and promote mental health of that employee? We can do that by asking 3 easy questions. As an employer, we can ask, what can we do to support your mental health at work? What will be helpful to maintain your positive mental health? And how will you continue to maintain your own mental health? What tools and resources would you like to use for your self-care? As well as have a frank conversation with the employee to say, how will you let us know if you need more support? How should we approach you if you think you might be struggling? And what are some of those words that we can use to approach you if we do see that there are some concerns or we see a change in behavior? How can we make sure that this is properly managed? These are some of the 3 easy questions, and we did speak to Mindful Employer Canada around them as well, so would like to thank them for their contribution here. But these are some of the 3 easy questions that we can ask to support employers who do work alone. Other strategies that can be identified are working alone should be minimized, and effective worker protection must exist for instances where it is necessary. We know that ensuring that all workers are properly trained to do their job and have health and safety training around all workplace hazards, whether or not it relates to physical or mental hazards, it should be helpful towards maintaining mental health of workers. We also know that it would be helpful to make sure there's good visibility around the workers' workspace. Now, whether they are truck stops, whether it is a mining site, whether it's the consultant's work area, we should have those displays around promotion of mental health and around giving those tips and tools for self-promotion and self-protection to employees. So with that, I would want to request any questions anyone has, as well as any resources that you wanted to share and with us. Happy to do that and speak to that in the chat function, but on the slide you'll see some of the resources we wanted to share with you as well. So any questions? Kim, I feel we have a really great question for you that's come up, and it is, are there any efforts being made to address substance abuse in the trucking industry?
There we go. I thought this was a very interesting question that came about. One of the things that we are really trying to promote is the use of employee and family assistance programs, which provide that confidential resource to employers and to employees to get connected with the resources that they require. That's one of the areas that we're really trying to promote, as we mentioned, where the uptake of EAPs currently within a number of our fleets is low at about 17 to 18%, really trying to promote the use of employee and family assistance programs to help make those connections and then get the supports that these drivers need in light of their unique situation being on the road and the schedules that they're working with. So that's one of the areas that we're really trying to promote. At this point, within our industry, it's very much building awareness, and then we're moving towards, now that we know this is what the reality is, what are the best resources with this unique working situation that we can get our drivers the help that they need.
Thank you so much for that. And there's actually a very interesting question that popped up as well. Someone was curious to find out why a trucker wasn't in this webinar to tell a personal story. And Kim, I definitely would like to approach you to answer that question, but I think it speaks from my perspective, it speaks very well to the fact that, as we said, we talked a lot about stigma in the workforce in this industry, but also it speaks to one of the first few steps that we hope this webinar and the efforts of the Trucking HR Canada will have and encourage others to speak up as well. So Kim, thoughts on this?
Well, I think, Nitika, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Within our industry, this is very much a stigmatized issue. It's very hidden, and I would suggest that it would be at this point potentially difficult to get a driver to speak to this at this point. We didn't reach out to a driver in particular. Instead, we went the blog route and getting it that way. But as I had mentioned, this is very much a hidden and a very hush-hush idea within the sector. So really getting the involvement that it's okay to talk about these issues. And hopefully in the future, as we develop more of these webinars, we will have drivers that are comfortable to come forward with their experiences and to tell us what it's really like behind the wheel. So that's why at this point we use those blogs, which are starting to get some momentum behind them, where these drivers are actually speaking about what their experiences are. A number of years ago, that wouldn't have even happened in our industry.
That's absolutely true. And another question that I find that for the trucking industry is really relevant, what about a buddy system? And I believe this also points to kind of a peer-to-peer type of system where truckers or others isolated workers can connect with each other. Is there any example in the trucking industry, Kim, that you know of as of a buddy or peer system?
Well, there are in some instances and with some fleets where there will be a partner driver in the cab, but also there are several trucking companies, and this is from our own interactions with some of these fleets that are using some different methods of communication for drivers, that even if they can't have a physical body with them in the cab, they are never, they never have to feel completely isolated. So depending on the size of the company, this can range from having 24/7 satellite connections and being able to always connect with their dispatchers and fleet managers. And this can be also truck stops themselves having certain resources. But we don't currently have a lot of information about what organizations are doing to try and limit this level of isolation that is very inherent to the job based on the nature of getting cargo from point A to point B, and oftentimes when we have the owner-operators that every mile that they drive is how they get paid. So we are looking at other technologies in cab that allow these drivers to have constant contact, whether it be their employer, their dispatcher, or fellow drivers, so that they don't feel that level of isolation, that they're not completely alone on the road.
Absolutely. And in terms of, I think definitely a lot of participants are saying that, thank you for sharing, Kim, around experiences with the trucking industry, and that they do see some crossovers to their own industries. One of the comments, I believe it's for perhaps the Commission, the comment said, I think it's important to have programs like Guarding Minds at Work to address the structural issues in the workplace, that there was some concern about focusing on the individuals with the 3 questions that we asked earlier, and because that there's still stigma existing in the society. And I completely agree. I think the comment is absolutely relevant, and I think that stigma is something we continue to fight against, whether it's in the society or in the workplace. And those 3 questions, however tailored they are to the unique situation and unique needs of the employee, are meant to be conversation starters. And these conversation starters may not take the form of specific questions. They may take the form of allowing employees to come and speak on their own, but just giving them that platform that it is okay to come and speak, and trying to reduce stigma that way. One of the things I know that workplaces have done, they have started off by educating their employees on mental health, and with the aim of reducing stigma around mental health and encouraging them to seek help when required. This is true of some of the training programs that are out there. 2 of them offered through the Commission, Mental Health First Aid, as well as the Working Mind. Essentially, it is definitely stigmatizing in mental health, and workplaces definitely do feel the impact of that. But these are some of the ways that we can get the conversation going, and there are other ways out there as well. There was another question that came out which said, how can we reach HR departments in all the sectors to ensure that these conversations are occurring, especially in unionized environments? And once again, this is a great question which I think has some answers hidden within the National Standard for Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace, which really does guide through a framework and a systematic approach of addressing workplace mental health in an environment, whether or not it's unionized. But I have to say also that mental health is one of the key important topics in which we are seeing union and management talk the same talk and coming to an agreement with what they feel the vision needs to be. They may approach it differently, but the concept and the sentiment remains the same. Thank you so much, and we do appreciate all the comments that have come up throughout the chat. In the interest of time, I think that we will stop here. And again, I would like to thank you, Kim, for all your time and your input today. Having said that, we want to encourage also all of you to join us for our next webinar, which will be taking place in May. And this webinar, in fact, will be focusing on the education sector, and we are very, very excited to have our speakers come and share their perspectives with you. And a gentle reminder to please fill out our survey that will pop up on your screen once you do finish the webinar today. These feedbacks do help us maintain the performance on the webinars, as well as the effectiveness of the content that we're coming to and bringing to you. So these are very, very useful for us. With that, I would like to thank all of you on behalf of the Mental Health Commission of Canada, as well as Trucking HR Canada, and we hope to see you next month. Thank you very much.